It was morning, but the light felt heavy, like it already knew what was coming. I woke up to the sound of silence, the kind that presses against your chest, not because the house is empty, but because something inside you already is. I sat on the edge of the bed where his shoes still waited neatly under the dresser, like they still believed he would wear them again. The clock on the wall ticked, but it didn't sound right, like it was keeping time for someone else now. I looked out the window and the town was still half asleep. The bakery on the corner had its lights on. Mrs. Carter sweeping the sidewalk just like she always did, but today the air felt wrong. The sky was too still. Even the birds seemed unsure if they should sing. I pulled his old sweater over my dress, the one he wore when he fixed the fence out back. It still smelled faintly of sawdust and his aftershave, and I closed my eyes for a second because sometimes it feels like if you breathe deep enough you can pull someone back from heaven just for one more breath. The pastor said they would come for me at 10. The funeral home car would stop right in front of the porch, the same porch where he used to sit every evening counting the cars that passed by, saying he liked to guess where people were headed. I used to laugh and tell him not everyone's story had to be guessed, but now I wish he'd guessed mine. Maybe he would have told me it would end like this. The coffee pot clicked, but I didn't drink any. I just poured a cup for him like I always did, placed it by his chair on the table. Even though I knew it would go cold, it just felt wrong not to. And as the steam faded, I could almost see his hands around it, rough hands, gentle hands, hands that built everything we had and held it together for 43 years. They said my son and his wife would be there at the church, but I hadn't heard from them since yesterday. She posted a picture online smiling with her friends, balloons behind her, some kind of party. Maybe they didn't remember what day it was. Maybe they just didn't want to feel the weight of it. Maybe they just wanted to dance while I sat here in the quiet with my coffee and his shoes. Sometimes I think grief doesn't hit like thunder. Sometimes it just sits quietly beside you like an old dog refusing to leave, and all you can do is breathe beside it, waiting for the day it finally gets tired and lets you go. And I remember the morning we met. He was standing outside the feed store that summer, the heat rising off the road like soft waves, and he smiled at me like he already knew my name. I was just a girl in a blue dress with a paper bag of peaches, and he asked me if I'd ever tasted one sweeter than sunlight, and I laughed because I didn't know you could talk like that about fruit or about love. And that was it. That was how it started, a question about peaches and a lifetime of never wanting to leave each other's side. The church bells had not yet rung, but the light through the curtains had started to stretch across the floor, slow and quiet, like an old friend walking in without knocking, and I sat there watching it crawl toward his photograph on the mantel, his smile caught in that picture from our 30th anniversary. His arm around me, my hair still brown, then his eyes bright as if he was looking at something far beyond the camera. Maybe he already saw where he was going. And the smell of the lilies filled the house. They were everywhere, too many maybe, but I didn't have the heart to move them. People had been kind, sending flowers, food, hugs, words that couldn't reach where the ache lived, but it was kindness just the same. I closed my eyes and it carried me back to another morning long ago, the sound of his boots on the porch, the smell of bacon, the baby crying in the back room, our son not even a year old then. And he would lift him up high in the air till that baby laughter filled the whole house, and he'd say, "This boy gonna change the world one day," and I'd smile because I believed him. Those were the years that moved slow and full of light. We didn't have much, but we had peace, the kind that comes from knowing someone will be there at the end of every long day, waiting with open arms. I remember the radio in the kitchen always playing softly while I cooked, and him coming in from the fields covered in dust saying, "Smells like heaven in here." And on Sundays we'd drive down the gravel road to the lake with our boy in the backseat singing made-up songs about the clouds. We'd spread out a blanket and eat sandwiches that never stayed neat, and he'd kiss me in that small way that said nothing loud but everything true. But time has a way of moving quiet and cruel. One day, you wake up and the boy who used to laugh in your arms has grown taller than his father. The porch creaks a little more, the days feel shorter, and you stop noticing how the seasons change. I think the first time I felt the distance was the night he told me, "Mama, I won't be staying here after college. I want the city, the lights, the fast life, the kind of place where no one knows your name unless you make it big." And I nodded, pretending I understood, because that's what mothers do. They smile while their hearts fold quietly inside themselves. And when he brought her home that first Christmas, I knew she didn't see what this small town held. She looked at our old house and smiled polite, but her eyes wandered over every chipped paint, every worn chair, like she couldn't wait to leave. And he looked at her the way his father once looked at me, and I realized something was changing, and maybe it was supposed to. I never blamed her, not really. I just missed the laughter that used to fill this house, the kind that didn't need music or wine or noise to feel alive. And now as I sat by his photograph waiting for the hearse, I thought about how far we'd come and how far apart we all seem to be now. And I whispered to his picture, "You'd still say he gonna change the world, wouldn't you?" And I swear for a second I could hear him laugh, that soft laugh that always made me feel safe no matter what was breaking around us. The clock ticked again, steady and cruel, and I stood up to fix my hair in the mirror, the same one I used to share with him on Sunday mornings, and in the glass I could almost see him behind me straightening his tie, asking if I'd packed his handkerchief. I always did. I always knew he'd forget. Outside, a car door slammed, and for a moment my heart lifted, thinking maybe it was them, maybe my boy had come early, but it was just the pastor come to take me to the church, his eyes kind, his words careful, and I nodded because there was nothing left to say. The church stood quiet at the end of Maple Street, small white walls, soft gray roof like a resting bird, the doors open wide and waiting, and I walked up those steps slow, each one heavier than the last, the wind gentle against my dress like it wanted to hold me but couldn't quite remember how, and when I stepped inside the world felt smaller, softer, filled with the smell of candles and old wood and loss. They had placed his casket near the front beneath the window where the morning light poured down through the glass, painting the room with color and silence. I stood there looking at him, my hands shaking a little, the flowers tucked around him, white roses his favorite, and for a moment I thought he might open his eyes and tell me we were running late to something we'd promised to attend. People started to come in, faces I hadn't seen in years, neighbors, friends, churchfolk, all whispering gentle words that floated past me like smoke. I heard them, but I didn't really listen. They said he was a good man, they said we were lucky to have had each other, and I nodded because I knew both were true. I took my seat in the front row, the spot they said was for family, but the pew beside me stayed empty. I kept glancing toward the door, waiting, maybe hoping to see my son walk in, his hand holding hers, maybe a small nod, maybe a hug, maybe something, but the door kept opening for others, never for them. And in that waiting I drifted again into the old days, the sound of rain on the roof, the night we lost the crop to the storm, and I cried because I thought we'd never make it through, but he held me close saying we still got each other, that's the only harvest that matters, and I believed him because his words always felt like the truth even when the world didn't. And then came the night he got sick, not sudden, not loud, just a slow fade like a candle burning down to its last inch. He didn't complain, just smiled, said I've had more good days than most men ever get. And when I tried to hide my tears, he told me to promise I'd keep living soft and kind even if the world forgot to be. The pastor started to speak, his voice low, steady, reading the Psalms, the words familiar but far away like echoes from another life. I folded my hands in my lap, feeling the cool gold of my wedding band pressing into my skin, a ring that had never left my finger, not once, not even in anger, not even in sleep. And still the door stayed closed. The choir sang softly, and I looked at his casket again and whispered under my breath, they didn't come, love, they didn't come. And I thought maybe he could still hear me, maybe from wherever he was he could see what I couldn't fix. I remembered the last night before he passed, we were sitting on the porch wrapped in the old quilt, the air thick with crickets and summer smell. He looked at me and said, if they ever forget where they come from, don't be angry, just remember they still carry pieces of us, even if they don't know it. I didn't understand it then, I do now. The final hymn started and I felt something loosen inside me, not peace, not forgiveness, just the quiet truth of what was gone, and what was never coming back. After the service people came to touch my hand to say how sorry they were, and I thanked them one by one, my voice calm, my heart somewhere far away. And when it was over I stood by the casket one last time, brushed my fingers over the wood and said goodbye in a whisper so small it almost didn't exist. Outside the sky had turned pale and still no sign of them. I climbed into the car, the pastor driving silent, the road winding through the town where every building held a memory, and every window seemed to watch, and when we passed by the old diner I saw something that made my breath catch. Through the glass, laughter, music, lights, my son, his wife, their friends holding drinks, their faces bright, alive, untouched by grief, and in that single moment the world went quiet again inside me, not anger, not shock, just that soft hollow sound of something breaking without a noise. I looked away, turned my face toward the window and whispered, you were right, love, they carry pieces of us even when they don't know it, but sometimes those pieces are too small to see. The road back home felt longer than it ever had before, the trees bending over the lane like they wanted to cover me from what the day had shown. The pastor spoke quiet words about peace and eternal rest, but I wasn't listening, my eyes fixed on the glass, the reflection of my own face, pale and tired, the kind of tired that lives in the bones. When we turned the corner near the diner again I couldn't stop myself from looking once more, the lights still glowing, the laughter still spilling out onto the street like spilled wine, careless, loud, unbothered, my son, his arm around her waist, her head thrown back in joy. They looked like strangers to me, like two people from a world that had never known our little porch, our cracked driveway, our nights of mending and praying and holding on. I wanted to think maybe it was someone else, maybe I had seen wrong, but a mother always knows even when her eyes wish they didn't. The pastor parked the car and helped me out, his hand gentle as if I might fall apart right there, but I was already past breaking. I thanked him in a voice that didn't sound like mine and walked up the steps to the house. The screen door creaked, that same sound he used to say meant home, and I almost smiled, but it didn't last. Inside the house the air felt thick, still carrying the scent of lilies and wax, the coffee cup still sitting cold by his chair. I sank down beside it, the quiet filling every corner of the room, and I thought about all the mornings that started here, the small ones, the simple ones, the ones that never made it into photographs. I reached for his sweater again, still draped over the arm of the couch, pulled it close to me like it could remember the shape of him. I closed my eyes and the memories came back, slow and gentle, the sound of his humming as he shaved, the way he'd tap his fingers against the table when thinking, the way he'd call me darlin' like it was the only word that ever mattered. I thought of the times we waited up late for our boy to come home from school, events, from dates, from life itself, the porch light glowing like a promise he'd always find his way back, and now he was grown, living just 5 streets away, and yet somehow farther than the stars. I whispered to the empty room, I saw them, love, I saw them laughing while we laid you down, and I waited for the anger to come. But it didn't, only sorrow, that heavy soft kind that wraps around you until you can hardly breathe. I walked through the house touching the things he built with his hands, the shelf by the window, the frame around our wedding photo, the old clock that never kept time right, and I realized how everything he'd left behind still worked better than the hearts he left them to. I sat by the window watching the dusk settle slow over the street, children's voices far off, the sound of a radio from a neighbor's yard, the world still spinning as if nothing sacred had ended, and for a moment I envied its forgetfulness. Then I saw the porch light flicker, and it took me back to that night years ago when the storm hit and we lost power. He had lit candles all through the house, said we don't need light to see each other, we just need to stay close, and we did. We sat there whispering about nothing and everything until morning came. I whispered to that memory, you always knew how to make the dark feel kind. And I sat there long into the night, the house dim, the silence wide, my hands folded around the sleeve of his sweater like a prayer. And in that stillness something inside me broke, not in pain but in understanding that grief doesn't end when the casket closes, it lingers in the quiet corners of memory. And in the empty seats at the table, it lives in the spaces where laughter should have been. And though I knew my son had chosen his own way, though I knew I might never understand it, I also knew love had made me softer, not bitter. And maybe that softness was all I had left to give. I stood up, turned off the porch light one last time, and whispered, good night, love, wherever you are, I hope it's peaceful there. And I hope you know I kept my promise, I stayed soft, even when the world didn't. The next morning came slow and gray, the kind of light that doesn't chase away the night, just folds it into something softer, gentler. The air outside was cool, the grass wet with dew, and I stood by the window in my robe holding a cup of coffee that tasted of nothing but habit. The street was quiet, only the sound of the mail truck down the road, and the faint echo of someone's dog barking at a world that kept moving. I looked at the empty chair across from me, the one that had always been his, the dent in the cushion still there like it waited for him to come back, and I thought about how strange it is that the body goes but the small things stay, the fingerprints on the jar, the half-read newspaper, the jacket still hanging by the door. Time doesn't take those, it just wraps them in silence. On the table was a small stack of envelopes, sympathy cards from the neighbors, the church, the people who had come to say kind things, and then gone back to their lives. I opened a few, read the words that all sounded the same, then set them aside and pulled out a blank sheet of paper from the drawer. I took a pen and started writing, not to anyone in this world but to him. My love. The morning after they laid you down, the world looks the same but nothing feels right. The birds still sing, the sun still rises, but I can't seem to find where to stand without you beside me. I saw them yesterday, our boy and his wife, they were smiling, they were happy, and for a moment I wanted to hate them for it, but I couldn't. You wouldn't have wanted that. I remember what you said about people carrying pieces of us. Maybe their laughter is still a piece of you, maybe that's how you live on now in ways I can't understand. I'll stay here in this house a while longer, maybe I'll plant the garden you always talked about, maybe I'll sit on the porch and watch the cars go by the way you did and guess where they're heading. Even though I'll never be right, I'll keep your coffee cup just where it is and your shoes under the dresser. I'll let the dust gather slow like time itself, waiting for something sacred to return. You were my morning, my night, my small forever. And though the world feels quiet without you, I promise I'll keep breathing. I'll keep the porch light on a little while longer, just in case love ever finds its way home again. I folded the letter slow, pressed it against my chest before tucking it inside the old family Bible, the one we never opened much but always kept close. Outside, the first wind of autumn began to move through the trees, carrying the smell of rain and endings. I stepped out onto the porch wrapped in his sweater and looked at the horizon where the town disappeared into the hills, everything soft gold and gray, and I whispered into that open air, you can rest now, love, I'll take it from here. The wind lifted, then quieted like it had heard and understood. And I realized grief wasn't something to survive, it was something to live with, to hold in both hands like a fragile glass that still caught the light. And though my son never came that day, though the laughter I saw at the diner would haunt me for many nights, I knew one truth: deeper than anger, deeper than lost, love never truly leaves, it just changes shape, waiting quietly in the corners of memory, until the heart is ready to see it again. I turned back toward the house, the screen door creaked, the clock ticked steady, and somewhere deep inside that stillness I felt him again, not as a voice, not as a ghost, but as the warmth that filled the space between one breath and the next. And that was enough.